You know that feeling when your stomach knots before the blow even lands? When you can sense the train wreck coming but you can't jump off in time? That was me. Except I wasn't just watching the wreck. I was strapped to the tracks. It all started in the early 2010s. The world was still figuring out YouTube. Content creators weren't a hot commodity yet. And most people still thought video editor just meant someone good with iMovie. I was young, hungry, and stupidly idealistic. When Alden University, mid-sized but ambitious private school, offered me a position as a full-time content creator, I leaped at the opportunity. They wanted to go digital, to reach Gen Z with flashy branding and storytelling. I was their guy. The pay was laughable, just over $2,000 a month. I didn't care. This was my foot in the door, my shot at building something meaningful. Plus, it wasn't like the competition was stacked back then. There just weren't many people doing serious content production on a solo basis. On my second day, my manager, Veronica, summoned me to her office. She had that overly rehearsed corporate smile, tight-toothy, and just a little too wide. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but there was a steel thread in it I didn't like. She handed me a one-page document with KPI targets typed in bold across the top. 85 videos. She said like it was nothing. Between 3 to 10 minutes long. Due within the year. I blinked. Is that for the whole team? Her smile didn't falter. For you. I tried to do the math in my head. 85 videos in 52 weeks. That was more than 1.5 videos per week, every single week. And this wasn't simple point-and-shoot vlogging. These were branded narrative-heavy university promos. I'd be scripting, casting, directing, filming, scoring, and editing on my own. I looked around their equipment room. Their cameras were a decade out of date. The editing suite was laughably underpowered. I had to bring in my own laptop just to run Adobe Premiere without crashing every 3 minutes. I explained all this to Veronica, trying not to sound like I was complaining. She nodded sympathetically and said, "Don't worry, we're more focused on quality than quantity. Give it your best, okay?" That okay stuck with me. It was soft, reassuring, but behind her eyes, I caught something colder, dismissive. She wasn't really listening. Still, I dove in head first. Worked like a man possessed, writing scripts late into the night, borrowing gear from friends, begging favors from former classmates to appear in videos. I even started composing original scores for some of the more emotional promos because they were too cheap to pay for royalty-free music. Everything went through me, and I was determined to make it shine. For the first month, Veronica was decent. She'd compliment my ideas in meetings, laugh a little too hard at my jokes, even brought me coffee once. Then came the cigarette break. It was a random Tuesday. I stepped outside for a 5-minute smoke to clear my head. Veronica walked past. She didn't say anything. Just looked at the cigarette, then at me. Her expression flickered just a second of distaste, but it was there. That night I mentioned it to a colleague, Nira. She practically face-palmed. "Oh no," she groaned. "Veronica hates smokers. She's on this weird crusade about it." Career-ending hate. I laughed it off. She wouldn't actually try to fire someone for smoking, would she? Nira didn't laugh back. Over the next few weeks, I felt the shift. It started with side comments. Veronica would wrinkle her nose after I came in from a break and make some passive-aggressive joke like, "Smells like a forest fire in here." Then came the constant clock watching. If I walked in even 5 minutes late after having stayed, 2 hours passed, closed the night before, she'd make a note of it. When I went silent during lunch breaks to recharge, she complained that I wasn't reachable. It was a drip, drip, drip of petty criticisms, each one more absurd than the last. But I kept working, harder than ever, because I didn't want to give her a reason. I thought if I just proved myself, if the videos were undeniable, she'd back. By month 5, I'd produced 30 solid videos. Every one of them was polished, conceptually strong, and on brand. Our YouTube channel had never seen numbers like this before. Admissions was thrilled. Faculty members I'd never met were emailing to say how impressed they were. And yet, I got the summons to the director's office on a rainy Thursday. As I walked down the corridor, heart thudding in my chest, I saw Veronica standing just outside. The door? She gave me a look. Not smug, exactly. Satisfied. Like a spider welcoming a fly into its web. Inside, the director, Mr. Patel, gestured for me to sit. His face was unreadable. "Micah," he said, "I'm disappointed." That word hit me like a truck. "I've been reviewing your KPIs," he continued. "We're nearly halfway through the year, and you've only completed 30 videos. I opened my mouth, words stumbled out. I explained everything: the workload, the outdated equipment, the round-the-clock effort. The overtime I never claimed. I reminded him that Veronica herself said quality was more important than quantity. She did. Patel raised an eyebrow. I turned to her. She was playing the role of the concerned boss now. Slight frown, arms folded, chin tilted just enough to suggest she was trying so hard to be fair. "I don't recall saying that," she said evenly. "I only ever emphasized the KPI target. 85 videos. I could feel the blood rushing. To my ears, betrayal. Deep, gut-level betrayal. I knew I'd just been cornered in. The walls were closing in fast. Patel shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we have to move in a different direction. We'll be terminating your contract effective." Immediately, I stared at them, stunned. "And the videos? How do you plan to finish them?" Veronica didn't even look up from her notebook. "We'll hire a professional production house," she said, with a smug little smirk on the word professional. The air shifted. Patel gave her a strange look, like he hadn't approved that yet, but he said nothing. Just nodded slightly. That was the moment the spark lit in my brain, because I knew exactly what she was about to do. You see, as the sole content person, I was also responsible for maintaining the university's internal vendor database for production houses. Veronica didn't know anyone in the industry. She didn't have the contacts, but I did. And in that moment, still burning from the injustice, still feeling like I'd been gutted, I realized I held the matchbook. War. All I needed was the right flame. When I left the office that day, I wasn't broken. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. The rain had picked up by the time I stepped out of the building. I didn't even bother to put up my hood. The water felt good, grounding. Like it was washing the residue of that room off me. Veronica's smug grin, the director's indifference, the quiet thud of the guillotine falling on 5 months of my soul-crushing effort. But underneath all that, something else was starting to bubble up. Something sharp, clean. I wasn't just angry, I was focused. I went home, sat in front of my laptop, and stared at the screen. The university's production vendor database was still open. My last act before the meeting had been updating a few contact emails. I scrolled through it. There were over 20 entries: names, emails, phone numbers, equipment capabilities. Specialties. I'd spent weeks vetting these companies when I first started. Now they were going to be used to replace me. To finish the project, I had broken myself over no, not if I had anything to say about it. I started by corrupting the database. Not deleting, just tweaking. I changed all the contact numbers to outdated landlines, messed up email addresses just enough to make them bounce. Most of these vendors wouldn't even notice they didn't monitor those inboxes closely. Anyone trying to reach them would hit dead ends for weeks, except for one. I scrolled until I found it. Solstice Creative Studios. A smaller shop, up and coming. I'd kept their contact intact for one reason, Alex. Alex and I had gone to film school together. He wasn't some assistant or intern. He was already functioning as a junior director, signed to lower budget but high visibility projects. Smart, driven, and most importantly, loyal. I dialed his number. Micah, holy crap, it's been forever. You got a minute? For you? Always. I told him everything. The ridiculous KPI, the long hours, the betrayal. And then the idea. I'm pretty sure Veronica's going to reach out to a vendor in the next 48 hours, I said. And given the mess I just made of the contact list, there's only one they'll be able to reach yours. Alex was silent for a beat. Then he laughed low and slow. You sneaky bastard, he said. What's the play? Simple. I said, you pitch like your life depends on it. I'll give you everything you need, the university's style, preferences, keywords that make the director drool. Hell, I'll give you a script for the pitch meeting itself. You land this gig? Your company rakes in 6 figures over the next 6 months. Alex exhaled. You want a cut? 15%, I said. Standard industry finder's fee. I'll ghost in the background. You take all the credit. Everybody wins. Except, of course, Veronica. He didn't even hesitate. Deal! Minutes later, I was on a Zoom call with his general manager, a guy named Blake Clincutt, MBA Energy. That's smart. When he realized this project would bring in more work than his studio had handled in a full year, his tone changed instantly. This could fast-track us into the big leagues, he said. You're really giving us the playbook. I nodded. Line by line. You'll walk in there like you've been working with the university for years. By the next day, they had the call. Sure enough, Veronica desperate, under pressure, and completely lacking in industry knowledge called Solstice Creative Studios. Alex told me afterward her tone was brisk, clipped, fake confident. We're looking for someone to complete a digital media campaign. 85 short-form videos, about 55 remaining. Timeline's tight. Alex played it perfectly. We've done education work before. What kind of themes are you targeting? Veronica rambled something vague about branding and academic vibrancy. Alex nodded slowly, then said, You know, that reminds me of your Voices of Tomorrow series. The warm color palette, the use of real students instead of actors, that was powerful stuff. Veronica was stunned. He could hear it in her voice. You've seen those. Of course, he said smoothly. We study emerging academic brands all the time. Yours stood out. It was over after that. She was hooked. The next day, Solstice came in for the formal pitch. I'd spent all night writing their presentation. Even included some keyword triggers I knew would melt the director's heart words, like transformative education, community storytelling, and digital-first engagement. They walked out with a signed contract. Veronica had no Idea she'd just handed the entire project and the inflated budget that came with it to someone I trained. Someone who now owed me a favor, it felt. Surreal. I didn't stop smiling for a week. They hit the ground running. With a full crew producers, editors, sound mixers, camera ops, they could do in 3 days what took me 3 weeks. They burned through the rest of the video list in 4 months. 50 polished high-production value films that looked like they came from a $1 million agency. Of course, they weren't cheap. Each video ran $8,000 to $12,000, even at the low. And that meant the project ballooned into a $500,000 endeavor. And thanks to our agreement, my 15% finder's fee came in like clockwork. It was more than 15 months of my original salary. I paid off my debts, booked a long overdue trip to Bali, and applied to a graduate program at a prestigious film school overseas. That's where I was poolside at a villa in Ubud. Cocktail in hand when I got the call. It was Nira. "Micah," she said breathlessly. "Oh my God! You're not going to believe what just happened? My stomach flipped." "What?" Veronica fired. "The director got reamed. Like, officially roasted. By the chancellor. Apparently the total budget for the entire video project was supposed to be 1.5 years of your salary. Just over 30 grand. They spent over 10 times that." I nearly dropped my drink. She pushed the contracts through herself. Nira continued. "Didn't get approval. She was so desperate to finish what you started, she signed off. On everything solo. The chancellor found out last week during a financial audit. She's gone, Micah. Gone." I just sat there in stunned silence while the sounds of the Balinese jungle filled the air behind me. All that work, all that pain, and in the end, she'd undone herself. I didn't even have to be in the room. When I hung up the phone with Nira, I just sat there in silence. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, and the pool water shimmered like liquid gold in the fading light. I took another sip of my drink, but I barely tasted it. She was gone, Veronica, the manager who smiled at me like I was an overgrown child with a camera on day one, who twisted the knife every time she smirked at my cigarette breaks or nitpicked my arrival time. She was gone, and she didn't go down in a blaze of managerial pride or some graceful resignation speech. No, she imploded, drowned in her own arrogance, cooked by the very fire she lit when she thought she could push me out and sweep in a professional to clean up my so-called mess. I didn't dance. I didn't cheer. I just leaned back, closed my eyes, and breathed. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Not to Veronica, not to the director, not even to myself. They didn't beat me. They only woke me up. The next morning, I had an email waiting in my inbox. It was from Alex.Subject. "You're a goddamn genius, Body. They're falling over themselves. Praising our instincts. Your playbook. Worked like witchcraft. Blake wants to offer you a permanent consulting role when you're done with school. Name your terms." I stared at the screen, laughing. Soft at first, then louder. Me. The guy they fired for being too slow. The underperforming one-man army. Now being offered a seat at the table by a company that just made more money for months than I had in my entire career up to that point. I typed a short reply. "Tell Blake I'll think about it." After the semester, then I shut my laptop and walked outside. I didn't need a plan right now. For once, I was allowed to just be. But even as the weeks passed, the story back home kept unfolding. Messier. More chaotic than I could have dreamed. NIRA. Kept me updated like a war correspondent reporting from the front lines of a crumbling empire. The chancellor apparently had summoned the director for a private disciplinary meeting. Word around the office was that it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a total evisceration. Veronica had authorized over $500,000 in spending without approval. Not only that, she tried to justify it by saying it was my fault. I had underperformed and left them no choice. But the chancellor wasn't having it. According to Nira, he said something like, "You fired the content creator who built the strategy." Then tripled the budget to recreate his results without asking anyone. The director was formally reprimanded. Her path to senior leadership gone. She was put under a financial supervision protocol, which, from what I gathered, was the administrative equivalent of wearing an ankle monitor. And Veronica, there was no ceremony, no farewell lunch, no flowers. She was walked out. I almost pitied her, almost. But then I remembered the day she smiled at me with her fake managerial warmth and said, "Just give it a try. I'm sure you'll manage." The way she used kindness like a blade, softening me up before driving in the expectations. She didn't just sabotage my job, she sabotaged my dignity. And she paid the price. Not because I screamed or cried or trashed her office, but because I let her arrogance dig her own grave. It was beautiful. A few months later, started at the film school I dreamed about since college. It's an actual studio-grade editing suite. Instructors who had worked on actual films I'd grown up watching. People who didn't laugh when I talked about color grading or narrative pacing. People who got it. I felt like I'd been reborn. Not just professionally, but emotionally. And then one day, something strange happened. I got a message from the university's new content. Manager subject. Consulting inquiry at first, I thought. It was a prank. But no, it was real. The university had apparently restructured the digital media department. New leadership, new staff, clean slate. That the message was polite, complimentary even. "We came across your early work and were deeply impressed. We'd love to explore ways to bring you on board in a consulting or advisory capacity." I read it twice. They didn't know what had happened behind the scenes. Or maybe they did. Maybe they knew exactly who I was and what I'd done in this. Was their way of extending an olive branch. Either way, I deleted it. I didn't need to go back. That place had been a battlefield for me. A proving ground. A furnace that burned away every illusion I had about loyalty, ambition, and trust. I wasn't going to return to rebuild the walls I had been crushed under. Instead, I kept moving forward. Solstice Creative Studios and I continued our collaboration remotely. I gave them strategies, frameworks, even helped them land to new clients with my pitch templates. I wasn't working full-time, but every project added to my portfolio, my reputation, and my bank account. And best of all, I was in control. No more impossible KPIs. No more managers peering over my shoulder like I was a problem waiting to happen. No more politics, just creativity, strategy, precision. It's funny. Veronica once told me I was too slow to keep up with the pace of real production. That if I wanted to last in the industry, I needed to adapt or get out of the way. Here I was 6,000 miles away, sipping espresso on a film school patio, while her career turned to ash. Karma doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't always come right away. But when it does, it's quiet, surgical, and if you're lucky, poetic. I didn't share the story publicly. I didn't need to. But when I look back now, Think about how many people like me are out there undervalued, underestimated, run into the ground by people who barely understand the work they oversee. And I think sometimes the best revenge isn't noise, it's silence, success, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'll never see you coming until it's too late. Some mornings I would wake up in my tiny dorm room in Amsterdam and forget what time zone I was in. The bed wasn't luxurious, just a single mattress on a frame with creaky slats, but every time I opened my eyes and saw the soft gray morning, light spilling over the windowsill, I felt free. Not successful, not vindicated, just free. I hadn't realized how heavy the pressure had been until it was gone. Like I'd spent years with someone's hand pressing on my chest, and finally I could breathe without effort. My classmates at the Film Academy came from everywhere, Seoul, Berlin, Lagos, Snow, Palo, all of us different. But all of us obsessed with telling stories that mattered. Nobody cared how many followers you had or whether your lighting rig cost $200 or $2,000. They cared about vision. And for the first time in a long time, I could see mine clearly. But every now and then, I'd hear echoes, little things, a tone, a voice that reminded me of Veronica, an email from a group project teammate that sounded a little too managerial, a sudden pang of dread when I saw a calendar reminder. Traces of the damage I hadn't fully acknowledged. I didn't talk about the university job, not really. If people asked where I'd worked before, I gave them a vague answer, content. Producer for an educational institution, and left it at that. It wasn't shame. It was something deeper. Like the pain hadn't finished calcifying yet. And yet, I carried that chapter of my life into every decision I made. Take feedback seriously, but don't internalize abuse. Okay, meet deadlines, but not at the cost of your sanity. Respect leadership, but only when they respect you back. By the 3rd month of school, I had started writing again. Not scripts, not pitch decks, just words. Personal essays, reflections. I kept them in a hidden folder on my desktop labeled clutter, but they weren't clutter. They were pieces of me I hadn't had time to meet before, and somewhere in between lectures on nonlinear editing and early mornings filming guerrilla style in the rain with classmates, something clicked. I wasn't just healing. I was growing. I got an offer to guest lecture at a small conference hosted by the School panel about digital storytelling in emerging platforms. I almost said no. Imposter syndrome was still alive and kicking in the back of my skull, reminding me that just a year ago, I'd been labeled a failure, a poor hire, KPI scroop. But I said yes. The room wasn't big, maybe 40 people, mostly students. But when I started sharing my experience, not just the revenge, but the sheer, grinding heartbreak of being dismissed, ignored. Underestimated eyes saw heads nodding. People leaned forward. Some even took notes. It hit me then. This story wasn't just mine. It was theirs. Too, because everyone has felt the sting of being told they weren't enough, that their work didn't count, that they were replaceable, and what they needed wasn't a fairy tale. They needed a mirror, so I gave it to them. I told them about how I built a 12-hour day from scratch, how I made music on cracked software because the budget wouldn't cover a subscription, how I edited 720p video on a 2007 laptop that whined like an old man every time I opened Premiere. I told them about the smell of cigarette smoke in the stairwell, and how it was never really about the smoke, was about control, about power, about Veronica needing someone to step on so she could feel tall. And then I told them about the moment everything flipped. How the person who was too slow and underwhelming turned into the exact key that unlocked the rest of the project. How the production house used my blueprints like gospel. How I got the final word without ever raising my voice. When the panel ended, people lined up to talk to me. Not because I had the best reel or the biggest credits, but because I had lived. It because they had. 2.1 girl, no older than 19, waited until the very end. She stepped forward, hugged her binder like a shield, and said, I was gonna quit this program. I thought I didn't belong. But hearing your story like what you went through and how you turned it around, it makes me think I don't have to give up yet. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just nodded and smiled, and later when I was alone again, I cried for the first time in months, not out of grief. Out of release, the weight I'd been dragging through my chest had finally dissolved. It wasn't revenge that did that. It wasn't the 15% cut or the shocked face of the director when the invoices rolled in. It wasn't even the poetic irony of being fired only for my plan to save the entire campaign. It was that girl, that one quiet moment where I saw, reflected in her eyes, a version of myself that was worth something again. By the end of that semester, I had a small side hustle as a consultant. Alex looped me in on 2 new clients, both education-related but far more visionary than the university ever was. I created video blueprints, brand tones, and content schedules they used for investor decks. The work was clean, direct, and most importantly, Dash respected no more being treated like the errand boy with a camera. I wasn't some unpaid intern fighting to make content under the weight of an impossible KPI. I was a creative strategist, a filmmaker in training, a survivor, but make no mistake, hadn't forgotten. Sometimes at night, I'd scroll through the old university YouTube channel, watch the videos I had created, the ones that still had the most views, even after the high-priced production. House had uploaded all theirs. My videos weren't as polished. The lighting was imperfect. But they had heart. They had soul. And the comments. They told the real story. This video actually helped me decide on applying here. Whoever made this, thank you. It doesn't feel like marketing. It feels real. This one hits different compared to the others. You can tell it wasn't outsourced. I'd sit there, fingers hovering over the keyboard, heart pounding with something like pride. Not because I needed validation, but because it was proof. Proof that what they threw away had value. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That what I felt back then, that relentless pressure, that creeping sense of injustice, that slow erosion of self-it, had been real. And that, despite it all, I had come out the other side not as a victim, but as the author of my own story. My revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was clarity, and it was only just beginning. I never expected to hear from them again. The university, the people I had mentally placed in a locked drawer labeled bullshit, I survived. But of course, the past has this inconvenient habit of knocking when you least want it to. It was a rainy Tuesday in March. I was in a quiet cafe in Prague, wrapping up revisions on a client's script deck and sipping an overpriced oat milk latte, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Local area code. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something, call it instinct, or maybe a morbid curiosity, made me swipe. Hello. There was a pause, then a slightly uncertain voice. Hi, is this Micah? I blinked. Yes, who's this? This is Fiona Zhang. I'm the new digital communications manager at Haverford University. That name hit like a cold wind. Haverford. I didn't speak. I found your name in some of the old files for our YouTube and video production archives. I saw the content credits and, I was wondering if you'd be open to a conversation about a consulting opportunity. I took a breath. She had no idea. She wasn't there. Probably came in after the storm. When the skies were calm, but the wreckage still smelled of smoke and bad decisions. And now, here she was, unknowingly asking the ghost of their failure to come back and save them. I'm listening, I said. Slowly, she explained that the university's digital engagement was declining. The outsourced production house had stopped working with them budget constraints. Apparently, and they were struggling to rebuild internal content strategies. She'd been hired 6 months prior, tasked with reviving the brand's digital presence. And when she went looking for what worked in the past, she found my videos. I'll be honest, she said, voice more confident now. Your content is the only thing that's still performing well organically. The tone, the authenticity, it's exactly what we're trying to recapture. I smiled without meaning to. It wasn't smug, just surreal. They wanted me again. After everything, I could have said no, could have laughed and hung up, could have told her exactly what that job had cost, me mentally, emotionally, professionally, but I didn't. Instead, I asked one question. What happened to Veronica? The pause was long enough for me to picture the frown forming on the other end. Oh, you mean Veronica Reese? She was let go about 1.5 years ago. Budget violation issues, from what I heard. She approved 6 figures worth of vendor contracts without authorization. My heart didn't leap. There was no thrill, just quiet confirmation. She got what she deserved, Fiona continued. The director at the time retired shortly after. I think the chancellor stepped in for a full audit and cleanup. I nodded. Of course. The empire they tried to build on lies and manipulation had finally caved in. I see, I said. Well, Fiona, appreciate you reaching out. Let me take a look at my schedule. This is just a casual consultation. I charge a flat rate for a 2-hour brand audit and strategy session. If you're looking for a full overhaul, I'd need a contract. No less than 3 months, paid monthly in advance. I expected pushback, hesitation, even ghosting, but Fiona, she didn't flinch. That sounds reasonable. Could you send me your portfolio and rate card? I smiled again. It's time a little. Wider? Absolutely. When I hung up, I just sat there for a few minutes, staring out the foggy window as tram wires shivered above the cobblestone street. And then I laughed. Not cruelly, not bitterly, just in awe of how far I'd come, of how absurd and poetic life could be, of the fact that the very institution that kicked me to the curb now needed the exact thing they discarded. That afternoon, I drafted a polished pitch. Clean, professional, subtle, but underneath every sentence was the same pulse. You had your shot, now you pay the price for getting rid of me. 3 weeks later, I was back on a Zoom call with their new team. Fiona was sharp, well prepared. I actually liked her. She wasn't a Veronica. She listened. She took notes. She gave credit. I presented a 12-week brand rejuvenation plan, including tone and voice documentation, suggested weekly video formats, content pillars, and a rollout schedule. They were stunned. This is exactly what we needed, one of the marketing directors muttered. I knew because I built the system they were still trying to copy. I was the blueprint. They agreed on my full retainer. It wasn't. even about the money anymore, though it was good. 5 figures. Clean. No overwork. No gaslighting. No KP as that contradicted logic and physics. It was about something. Eager, control, closure, command, and I wielded it not with fire, but with finesse. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with shouting, slammed doors, or someone getting dragged. In front of a disciplinary board, sometimes it looks like this. You sitting calmly on a video call, teaching the people who once dismissed you how to do the job they swore you couldn't, not because you need their approval, but because you finally know your worth and they do. 2. By the end of the contract, they asked if I'd consider becoming their long-term creative consultant. I declined politely, firmly, and when I logged off for the final time, I leaned back in my chair, closed my laptop, and exhaled not out of exhaustion, but completion. I'd come full circle, and there were still 2 parts of this story left to write, because just when I thought I had found peace, something unexpected arrived in my inbox, a job offer. Not just any job, an opportunity to lead something much, much bigger. Asterisk. I didn't plan on going back into the education world, not after everything that happened. And yet, somehow, it found me again. A few months after I finished that short-term consultancy with Haverford, I'd been deep into freelance work, taking on dream projects for tech startups, NGOs, and even a docu-serious pitch. Life was peaceful. My days were full. My rent was paid in advance, and I had time to think. Not just work. Think. Then one night, an email came through. The subject line was simple: Creative Director Opportunity. Let's talk. I almost archived it without reading. The sender name didn't ring any bells, Dr. Lionel Reyes, but something about it caught my eye. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Micah, I'm the newly appointed Chancellor of Newbridge Polytechnic. We're in the midst of rebranding the institution's digital presence, and your name came up more than once from both academic circles and production. Partners, I've reviewed your work, particularly the early university pieces and your more recent consultancy efforts. I'm reaching out to explore whether you'd be interested in a creative director role, one with full autonomy to build a digital storytelling unit from the ground up. I believe in empowering creatives, not managing them with spreadsheets. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to set up a call. Warmly. Dr. Reyes. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't want it, but because I did more than I'd expected. There was no trace of manipulation, no buzzword-laden promises, just honesty and respect, I replied the next morning. We set up a call later that week. Dr. Reyes was different from the directors and bureaucrats I'd known before. No pretense, no need to assert dominance. He simply asked, what would it take for someone like you to say yes? And for the first time in years, I laid it out without apology. Fair pay, full creative control. A team, not a one-man sweatshop, and a year to build the vision right. I wasn't looking to fix someone else's mess. I was ready to build something of my own. He didn't blink. He just said, done. 6 weeks later, I moved to a new city, walked into a clean office with new equipment. It's a small but hungry team, waiting to be mentored, and a budget that didn't make me laugh bitterly. It felt unreal. But here's the thing no one tells you. When you've been through hell, peace feels suspicious at first. For the first month, I kept waiting for the catch. For someone to pull the rug again, a KPI ambush. A passive-aggressive manager lurking in the hallway. A colleague with a fake smile and a secret report, but nothing came. Instead, there were brainstorming sessions with whiteboards and laughter. Late nights spent editing not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Weekly check-ins where Dr. Reyes actually listened and asked questions that made me feel ... trusted. I built a team of misfits and underdogs filmmakers who'd been passed over. Editors who were told they weren't fast enough. Animators who worked freelance jobs at midnight just to survive. And together, we made magic. Short films, student profiles, event promos that didn't feel like cringy ads, but honest stories. We weren't just checking boxes. We were moving people. The YouTube channel exploded. Engagement tripled. National education outlets started featuring our work. Students who had never felt seen suddenly became the stars of their own stories. But the best moment, it came 6 months in. I was sitting in a conference room prepping for a quarterly strategy review when my assistant walked in with a letter. Someone dropped this off personally, said it was for you. It was a simple envelope. No logo. Handwritten. Inside was a folded note and a business card. The note read, Micah, I saw your name in the credits again. You built something beautiful. I didn't see it then. I do now. F, just an initial. But I knew Veronica. Her handwriting. I'd seen it on reports and memos years ago. I turned the card over. It was blank. No number. No title. Just her name. I sat with it for a while. Not angry, not vindicated, just... Still, it wasn't forgiveness. I didn't owe her that. And she didn't ask for it. But it was an acknowledgement. A quiet admission that her warpath, her ego, her prejudice had been wrong. And I had risen anyway. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because nothing needed to be said. Her world had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Mine had grown in the fertile soil of quiet resilience. You see, the best revenge isn't when they see you win. It's when they realize they had everything they needed and threw it away. And you built an empire without them. I walked into that strategy meeting, handed out reports, and watched my team beam as their work got praised. They didn't know my past. They didn't need to, because my future was no longer defined by it. But there's still one more piece to this story, because just when I thought my chapter of revenge was closed, the world had one last surprise, and this time, it wasn't about payback. It was about passing it on. A year passed. Then another what began as a job ban. Opportunity had grown into a legacy. The digital storytelling unit I built at Newbridge Polytechnic wasn't just successful, it became a blueprint. Other universities began to take notice. They'd reach out to my team asking how we ran things. How we achieved so much engagement with so little fluff. How our videos felt real. And every time they asked, I'd say the same thing. It's not about equipment, it's about dignity. Let people matter and they'll make magic. It wasn't just about content anymore. It was about transformation. For me, for my team, and for every underdog who'd ever been told they weren't enough. But just when I thought I'd found my permanent chapter, life handed me one last twist. I got a call from a familiar voice. Alan, my friend, from the production house. The same guy who helped me pull off the revenge of a lifetime years ago. Micah, he said, I need you. He sounded breathless, a little panicked. Not like him. I've just been offered the creative head position at a new startup campus. Fully funded, international scope, the works. But the timeline is insane. They want to go public with their brand story in 6 months. I can't do this alone. I need a partner. Someone who's done this before. Someone I trust. I was quiet for a moment, and then I laughed. It wasn't derisive. It wasn't cynical. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you realize the universe might actually know what it's doing. I met Alan the next day. He laid out the Vision Global Outreach, cross-campus campaigns, a streaming docuseries. He didn't just want help. He wanted me at the top. Equal partner. It wasn't about money anymore, or titles. It was about creation. Ownership. I said yes. And as we launched the new venture, something began to happen. I started getting messages, former interns, past colleagues, even strangers, people who'd heard of the Micah method, who said my story, what little they knew of it, inspired them to stay in the fight, to walk away from toxic jobs, to build something for themselves. I hadn't just survived. I'd become proof that you could be underestimated, discarded, humiliated, and still rise. Not in spite of it, because of it. And then came the final piece. The full circle at a creative education summit in Singapore. I gave a keynote on authenticity and institutional storytelling. Afterward, a young man approached me. Mid-20s, camera strapped across his chest, wide-eyed. Hey, you probably don't remember, but you mentored me years ago. I was a production assistant during your first semester at Newbridge. I watched how you worked, how you fought for your team. I wanted to quit school before I met you. But after I saw how you handled everything with so much focus, I switched to majors. Graduated top of my class. Now I run the digital unit at my university. He paused. I just wanted to say thank you. I smiled, not the polite kind. The kind that lives in your bones. I didn't say much, just offered a handshake. Told him to keep going. And meant it. Because that's the thing about revenge stories. People think they end when the villain falls. But the best ones, the real ones, they don't end in explosions. They end in ripples. You don't just burn the bridge. You build a better one and watch others cross it, Veronica. She faded into obscurity. Never worked in a leadership position again. Her LinkedIn now lists vague consulting gigs and former media strategist. Heard she applied for a couple of government comms roles and didn't make it past the first round. The director. Last I checked, he took early retirement. Probably because the scandal with the budget overruns clung to his name like smoke. Maybe he thought firing me would save him time and money. Turns out it cost him both. But me? I traveled the world. Built teams. Told stories. Woke up excited instead of exhausted. And the greatest plot twist. None of it would have happened if I hadn't been fired. If they hadn't tried to break me. If they hadn't underestimated me. Sometimes rock bottom is a springboard. Sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. It's building a life so good. They couldn't even imagine it. So to anyone out there who's ever been gaslit, disrespected, dismissed, remember this. They didn't ruin you. They revealed you. And you. You've only just begun. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales of revenge, resilience, and rising stronger. And hey, tell us in the comments, what's your favorite revenge moment? Let's share some justice.